The camera fades into the sound of distant fireworks and the chaotic flash of cameras. Reporters crowd around, their voices overlapping with sharp, demanding questions. Lays Montero, a composed yet visibly shaken tech CEO, stands in the middle of the storm, her breath visible in the cold New Year's Eve air. Behind her, a giant digital screen flashes accusatory headlines: "Fraud Scandal Rocks Silicon Valley," and "The Fall of a Tech Prodigy." Her voice trembles as she begins to speak. This company was built on trust, but that trust was broken. The camera zooms in on her face, capturing a mix of heartbreak and resolve. What you don't know is what really happened, and why this betrayal was only the beginning. The screen cuts to black, with dramatic music rising in the background. This is a story of betrayal, resilience, and redemption that you won't want to miss. Subscribe to our channel now and turn on notifications to uncover the truth behind Laysa's rise, fall, and fight to rebuild her dream. The glow of the California sun bathed the sleek glass facade of the office building, reflecting a sense of infinite possibility. Inside, the hum of activity filled the air, a symphony of keyboard clicks, muted conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter from the break room. This was the heartbeat of Lays Technologies, a rising star in the highly competitive world of Silicon Valley startups. Lays Montero stood near the floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office, gazing out at the sprawling tech campus below. From this vantage point, she could see the rhythm of the city that had come to define her life. It wasn't just the gleaming towers of innovation or the bustling co-working spaces. It was the promise of what lay ahead, the feeling that anything was possible if you dared to dream and work for it. Her journey to this moment was anything but ordinary. Lays had grown up in a modest neighborhood in New Jersey, where opportunities were scarce, and dreams often felt like distant stars. But even as a child, she had a knack for seeing possibilities where others saw limits. At 12, she had taught herself coding using an old computer she had salvaged from a local recycling center. By high school, she was designing apps that caught the attention of local businesses. Her big break came during her senior year of college when she co-founded her first startup, a platform that revolutionized virtual collaboration. Within 3 years, the company was acquired by a tech giant, catapulting Lays into the ranks of Silicon Valley's elite. But despite the wealth and acclaim, she remained grounded, driven by the same relentless curiosity and hunger for innovation that had fueled her as a teenager. Now, Lays was leading her second venture, and it was poised to disrupt the way people interacted with technology on a global scale. Yet, for all her accomplishments, she never lost sight of the people who helped her along the way. One of those people was Marcelo, her business partner and closest friend. They had met during her first startup venture, and his sharp business acumen had been instrumental in turning her ideas into scalable solutions. Their partnership was seamless, built on mutual trust and an unspoken understanding. The office buzzed with a sense of urgency as the team prepared for the upcoming product launch. The holiday season added an extra layer of excitement, with strings of twinkling lights adorning the hallways and a tall, elegant Christmas tree standing proudly in the lobby. Despite the festive decor, the pressure was palpable. Investors were watching closely, and the stakes had never been higher. Lays thrived under pressure. She had a gift for inspiring her team, often walking the floor to check in on progress, offering encouragement or a sharp insight that reframed a challenge. Her presence was magnetic, and the employees admired her not just for her brilliance but for her authenticity. She knew the names of their children, remembered birthdays, and celebrated personal milestones with the same enthusiasm she reserved for corporate victories. Yet, beneath her composed exterior, Lays felt the weight of expectation. The tech world was unforgiving, and success could turn to scandal in an instant. She often reflected on advice from her mentor, Mr. Oswald, a retired industry veteran who had taken her under his wing during her early years in Silicon Valley. He had taught her that integrity was the cornerstone of leadership. The higher you rise, the harder the fall, he had once warned her. But if you stay true to your values, you'll always have a way back. That morning, Marcelo entered her office with his usual confident stride, holding a tablet with the latest performance metrics. His sharp suit and easy smile made him a natural in the boardroom, but Lays valued him most for his ability to think 3 steps ahead. "The numbers look promising," he said, handing her the tablet. "Engagement rates are up 12% since the beta rollout. Investors will eat this up." Lays scanned the data, her mind already formulating how to present it at the next meeting. "Good work," she replied, her tone calm but decisive. "But let's not get complacent. There's always room for improvement." Marcelo chuckled, a familiar glint in his eye. "You wouldn't be you if you didn't push for more." As he left, Lays felt a pang of gratitude for their partnership. In a world as cutthroat as Silicon Valley, finding someone you could trust was rare. Marcelo had proven himself time and again, and she considered him not just a colleague but a brother. Yet, as the day wore on, small details began to gnaw at the edges of her mind: an incomplete report here, an unexplained delay there. She dismissed them as the usual chaos of a growing company, but a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that something was slightly off. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the office in a warm amber glow, Lays sat alone at her desk. The Christmas lights on the tree in the corner twinkled softly, a reminder of the season's promise of renewal and hope. She leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a rare moment of quiet. For all the challenges, this was the life she had dreamed of. And yet, as she gazed out at the city that had embraced her so fully, she couldn't ignore the faint whisper of unease that lingered in the back of her mind. The streets of Silicon Valley shimmered under the glow of holiday lights strung across office buildings and tree-lined boulevards. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine from the Christmas decorations scattered throughout the tech district. It was a season of celebration, yet for the bustling minds of the valley, it was also a season of anticipation. The end of the year signified one thing: the unveiling of next year's innovations. Lays Montero, a figure now synonymous with ingenuity and success, was a frequent presence in the valley's elite circles. Her reputation as a prodigy of the tech world had earned her invitations to exclusive events and panels. But even amidst the glitz and glamour, Lays remained focused. For her, these gatherings were less about status and more about connection. Every handshake, every conversation was a potential key to unlocking the next big opportunity. On this particular evening, Lays found herself at one of the most prestigious events of the year, held at a sprawling conference center decked in festive decor. The venue was alive with the hum of innovation, engineers discussing breakthroughs, venture capitalists trading whispers about promising startups, and CEOs outlining bold visions for the future. It was a world of endless possibility, where dreams were fueled by ambition and the promise of exponential growth. Lays moved through the crowd with practiced ease. She was dressed in an elegant yet understated suit, a deliberate choice that reflected her philosophy: let the work speak louder than the image. As she engaged with some of the industry's most influential figures, her confidence was evident. She was no longer the girl from New Jersey struggling to be taken seriously. She was a force to be reckoned with. Marcelo, her business partner, was by her side, effortlessly navigating the social dynamics of the evening. He had a natural charisma that complemented Lays's quieter intensity. Together, they made an impression, an unstoppable duo driving the future of technology. Marcelo's ability to charm investors and Lays's visionary leadership were a perfect combination, and their latest project was the talk of the town. The product they were preparing to launch promised to revolutionize how people interacted with artificial intelligence. It was an ambitious endeavor, blending cutting-edge machine learning with intuitive design. Investors were already clamoring to get in on the ground floor, and the media had begun to label Lays as the next Steve Jobs. The pressure was immense, but Lays thrived under it. She saw the challenges not as obstacles but as puzzles waiting to be solved. As the evening progressed, Lays found herself in a conversation with a seasoned venture capitalist who had been an early backer of some of the Valley's most iconic companies. He was impressed by her track record and vision. "What sets you apart," he said, swirling his glass of wine, "is your authenticity. People trust you, Lays. That's rare in this industry." Lays smiled graciously, though the compliment stirred something uneasy within her. Trust was indeed her cornerstone, but the enormity of that expectation weighed heavily. She thanked the investor and excused herself. Needing a moment to gather her thoughts, she stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city. The view was breathtaking, rows of twinkling lights stretching into the horizon, a testament to the valley's boundless energy. Yet, as she stood there, a faint sense of disquiet crept in. She thought of the recent inconsistencies she had noticed in some of Marcelo's reports. They were minor, nothing overtly alarming, but enough to stick in her mind. Her thoughts were interrupted when Marcelo joined her on the balcony. He carried 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to her with a grin. "To us," he said, raising his glass. "The dream team." Lays chuckled softly and clinked her glass against his. "To the future," she replied, though her voice lacked the usual conviction. Marcelo didn't seem to notice. He launched into a story about a potential investor he had met earlier, his tone as confident as ever. As he spoke, Lays studied him quietly. Marcelo had always been an enigma to her, brilliant, ambitious, and fiercely loyal, or so she believed. But tonight, there was a subtle edge to his demeanor that she couldn't quite place. Was it just the stress of the upcoming launch? Or was there something more beneath the surface? Back at the office the following day, the holiday atmosphere was in full swing. Employees wore Santa hats, and the break room was stocked with cookies and hot cocoa. A secret Santa gift exchange added a touch of warmth to the otherwise high-pressure environment. Lays made it a point to participate, knowing how much it meant to her team to see her involved. Despite the festivities, her mind remained preoccupied. She called for an impromptu meeting with Marcelo to review the latest financials. He arrived with his usual easy charm, presenting the figures with practiced confidence. But as Lays scrutinized the details, her unease grew. Some entries seemed oddly vague, and when she pressed Marcelo for clarification, his answers were deflective. "Don't worry," he said with a casual wave. "It's just year-end adjustments. Standard stuff." Lays nodded, but the explanation didn't sit right with her. She decided to have the finance team conduct a deeper review, though she kept her concerns to herself for the time being. Trust had always been the foundation of her relationship with Marcelo, and she wasn't ready to disrupt that without concrete evidence. As the day turned into evening, Lays stayed late at the office. The Christmas lights cast a warm glow over the workspace, but she felt a growing chill. She sifted through reports and spreadsheets, searching for patterns or anomalies that might explain her nagging doubts. It was tedious work, but Lays was nothing if not thorough. By the time she left the office, the city was quiet, save for the occasional car passing by. The streets were lined with holiday decorations, their bright colors contrasting sharply with the heaviness she felt. She reminded herself of Mr. Oswald's words, "Follow your instincts, but don't let suspicion cloud your judgment. Balance is key." As she drove home, Lays couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to unfold. The world of Silicon Valley was one of constant motion, where fortunes could change in an instant. For now, all she could do was brace herself for whatever lay ahead. The allure of the valley had always been its promise of endless opportunity, but Lays was beginning to see its shadow side, the secrets, the sacrifices, and the betrayals that lurked beneath its dazzling surface. The morning started like any other in the fast-paced world of Lays Technologies. The office hummed with energy as teams prepared for critical project deadlines. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the open-plan workspace where developers huddled over monitors, designers sketched wireframes, and managers paced with phones pressed to their ears. Despite the frantic pace, there was a sense of excitement in the air, the kind that only came when a product launch was just within reach. Lays arrived early, as usual, a cup of coffee in hand and her laptop tucked under her arm. Her sharp black blazer and confident stride reflected her leadership style, direct, composed, and always in control. She moved quickly through the office, exchanging brief greetings with team members and offering encouraging nods. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind was preoccupied. The events of the past few days lingered in her thoughts. Subtle irregularities in the company's financial reports had planted a seed of doubt, one she couldn't ignore. Marcelo's explanations, while plausible on the surface, felt evasive. Lays had built her career on her instincts, and they were telling her something wasn't right. But in the absence of concrete evidence, she kept her suspicions to herself. For now that as the morning progressed, she called a meeting with the finance team to go over the year-end figures. The team assembled in the conference room, a sleek space with glass walls and a view of the bustling courtyard below. The room was filled with charts, graphs, and spreadsheets projected onto the wall, outlining the company's performance. Everything appeared to be in order at first glance, but Lays pressed for details. "Walk me through the discrepancies here," she said, pointing to a specific line item in the report. "This expense doesn't match the projected allocation." One of the junior accountants shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It's unusual, but we assumed it was part of the adjustments approved by Marcelo," he said hesitantly. The documentation was signed off. Lays's gaze sharpened. "Let me see the documentation." The accountant handed her a folder, and she flipped through its contents. The paperwork bore Marcelo's signature, but the details were vague, too vague for a transaction of its size. Her stomach tightened as she realized this was more than just a clerical error. After the meeting, Lays returned to her office and stared at the folder on her desk. Marcelo had always been meticulous with financial matters. He prided himself on his attention to detail, often catching errors that others missed. For something like this to slip through under his watch was highly uncharacteristic. Either he had become careless, a thought she found difficult to believe, or there was another explanation, one that she wasn't ready to confront. Her thoughts were interrupted when Marcelo knocked on her door and walked in with his usual air of confidence. He held a tablet with the latest project updates and smiled as he approached her desk. "Got a minute?" he asked, setting the tablet down in front of her. "I wanted to go over the marketing strategy for the launch." Lays nodded, but her attention remained fixed on the folder. She closed it discreetly and leaned back in her chair. "Actually, I need to discuss something with you first," she said, her tone measured. Marcelo's expression didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or caution. "What's on your mind?" Lays picked up the folder and handed it to him. "This expense. It's flagged in the year-end report. The details are unclear, and the allocation doesn't align with the budget." Marcelo took the folder and flipped through its pages, his brows furrowing slightly. "Ah, yes, this. It's for a vendor we're testing out for back-end infrastructure," he said casually. "The timing wasn't ideal, but we needed to secure the contract before the year ended." Lays studied him carefully. His explanation was smooth, but it lacked the thoroughness she had come to expect from him. Why wasn't this discussed with the finance team beforehand? "It's a substantial expense." Marcelo shrugged, offering a disarming smile. "It was a last-minute opportunity. I didn't want to slow things down by dragging it through approvals." His response was plausible, even reasonable, but it didn't sit right with her. Lays had built her company on a foundation of transparency and collaboration. Marcelo's unilateral decision-making felt out of place, especially for someone who valued teamwork as much as he claimed to. "All right," she said finally, her tone neutral. "Let's make sure we document this properly moving forward. I'll need a full breakdown of the vendor agreement by tomorrow." Marcelo nodded, his smile unwavering. "Of course. I'll take care of it." As he left her office, Lays couldn't shake the feeling that he had deflected her questions. She made a mental note to dig deeper into the matter once the immediate pressures of the product launch had subsided. The day wore on, and the usual chaos of the office kept Lays busy. Meetings, phone calls, and last-minute adjustments to the product roadmap consumed her time. By the evening, the office had quieted down, and most of the staff had left for the day. Lays stayed behind, combing through financial records on her computer. The more she looked, the more anomalies she found. Small, seemingly insignificant transactions that, when pieced together, began to form a troubling pattern. The amounts were carefully calculated, never large enough to raise immediate red flags, but consistent enough to suggest intentionality. her heart sank as the implications became clear. Someone within the company was manipulating the numbers, and all signs pointed to Marcelo. The realization felt like a blow to the chest. Marcelo wasn't just her business partner, he was her friend, someone she had trusted implicitly. The thought that he might be betraying her trust was almost too painful to bear. Lays leaned back in her chair, staring at the spreadsheet on her screen. The Christmas lights outside her window twinkled softly, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling inside her. She thought of Mr. Oswald's advice: integrity isn't just about doing what's right. It's about holding others accountable, even when it's hard. Taking a deep breath, Lays made a decision. She would launch a quiet investigation, enlisting the help of a trusted advisor from her legal team. If Marcelo was innocent, the investigation would clear his name. But if he wasn't, Lays would have to confront a truth she wasn't ready to face. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave the office, she felt a mix of determination and dread. The dream she had worked so hard to build now felt fragile, as though it could shatter at any moment. The streets outside were empty, save for the soft glow of holiday decorations lining the buildings. The world seemed peaceful, but for Lays, the storm was just beginning. The faint sound of rain tapped against the glass walls of Lays's office as the gray light of an overcast afternoon filtered in. The usual hum of activity in the open workspace seemed quieter, as if the air itself sensed the weight of what was about to unfold. Lays sat at her desk, surrounded by piles of documents, spreadsheets, and encrypted emails that her legal team had flagged over the past few days. The investigation she had quietly initiated was already yielding results. What had started as subtle inconsistencies in the company's financials was now unraveling into a web of carefully orchestrated deception. Each new piece of evidence confirmed her deepest fear: Marcelo, her trusted partner, was at the center of it. Lays leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen of her laptop. The files on display detailed multiple fraudulent transactions, each authorized under Marcelo's name. They were small enough to avoid immediate detection but frequent enough to accumulate into a significant amount. Payments to non-existent vendors, falsified invoices, and suspicious withdrawals painted a damning picture. She wanted to believe there was another explanation, some mistake or misunderstanding. But as she scrolled through the evidence, it became increasingly clear that this wasn't an oversight. Marcelo's actions were deliberate. The betrayal stung like a physical wound. Marcelo wasn't just her business partner, he was her friend, her confidant, someone who had been with her from the early days of her career. She thought of all the late nights they had spent strategizing, all the victories they had celebrated together. To imagine that he had been plotting behind her back felt unbearable. Her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from the head of the finance team, confirming the completion of their forensic audit. The final report was ready. Lays hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the phone. Did she truly want to see what it contained? Taking a deep breath, she opened the message and downloaded the file. It was worse than she had feared. The audit revealed that Marcelo had been siphoning funds for over a year, using shell companies to hide the transactions. The amounts were staggering, millions of dollars diverted from the company's accounts. Lays felt a wave of nausea wash over her as she absorbed the information. The magnitude of the fraud threatened to destroy everything she had built. If word got out, the company's reputation would be ruined. Investors would pull out, employees would lose their jobs, and the dream that had once seemed so bright would crumble to dust. She stared out the window, her reflection blending with the raindrops that streaked the glass. How had it come to this? How had she failed to see the signs? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Marcelo walked in, carrying a stack of files. His usual confident demeanor was intact, but Lays noticed something different this time. A flicker of nervousness in his eyes, a subtle hesitation in his movements. Got a few updates on the marketing front, he said, setting the files on her desk. We're seeing great engagement numbers from the beta campaign. The launch is shaping up to be a huge success. Lays nodded, her expression carefully neutral. Thanks, Marcelo. I'll take a look. He lingered for a moment, as if sensing the tension in the air. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his tone casual but probing. Lays forced a small smile. "Just a lot on my mind," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "You know how it is." Marcelo nodded, his own smile faltering slightly. "If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know." As he left the office, Lays felt a surge of anger rise within her. How could he stand there, pretending everything was fine, when he had been systematically betraying her trust? She wanted to confront him right then and there, to demand an explanation, but she knew better. This wasn't the time for impulsive action. Instead, she called a meeting with her legal team and a trusted PR advisor. They gathered in a small conference room late that evening, the atmosphere heavy with urgency. Lays laid out the evidence, her voice calm but firm as she explained the situation. "We need to handle this carefully," she said. "If this leaks to the media before we've had a chance to address it internally, the damage could be catastrophic." Her legal counsel, a seasoned attorney named Eleanor, nodded thoughtfully. "The first step is to secure the company's assets and ensure no further transactions can be made without oversight. We'll also need to prepare for the possibility of legal action against Marcelo." The PR advisor, a sharp and pragmatic woman named Camille, leaned forward in her chair. "The narrative is going to be critical. You've built your brand on trust and integrity, Lays. We need to make it clear that you had no knowledge of Marcelo's actions and that you're taking decisive steps to address the situation." Lays listened intently, her mind racing with the weight of the decisions ahead. Every move she made in the coming days would be scrutinized, not just by the media but by her employees, investors, and the tech community at large. Failure to act swiftly and decisively could cost her everything. By the time the meeting ended, it was well past midnight. Lays returned to her office, feeling the exhaustion settle into her bones. The Christmas lights on the tree in the corner glowed softly, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling in her mind. She thought of her mentor, Mr. Oswald, and his unwavering belief in her ability to overcome any challenge. She wished she could call him, hear his steady voice reminding her that integrity would always prevail. But this was a battle she had to face on her own. As she sat at her desk, staring at the mountain of evidence in front of her, a sense of clarity began to emerge. Marcelo had betrayed her, but he wouldn't destroy her. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let her dream crumble now. Taking a deep breath, Lays picked up her phone and began drafting an email to the board of directors. It was time to bring them into the loop and start charting a path forward. The road ahead would be difficult, but Lays was determined to see it through. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the clouds began to break, revealing a sliver of moonlight. It was a small reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always a glimmer of hope. The morning sunlight streamed through the office windows, casting long shadows across the sleek desks and humming computers. The atmosphere in the office was charged with the usual pre-launch excitement, but for Lays, the energy felt different. It was tense, heavy, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of her growing despair. The damning evidence against Marcelo sat in a folder on her desk, a constant reminder of the betrayal she was still struggling to process. She had alerted the board late the previous night, and the initial responses had been cautious but supportive. For now, the issue remained confidential, known only to a handful of trusted advisors. But Lays knew that secrets rarely stayed hidden in the tech world, especially when money was involved. Her phone buzzed, pulling her attention from the folder. A notification lit up the screen, a breaking news alert from one of Silicon Valley's most prominent tech blogs. Lays's breath caught as she opened the article. The headline hit her like a physical blow. "Fraud Scandal Rocks Lays Technologies, Allegations Surface Against CEO and Co-Founder." Her vision blurred for a moment as she scanned the article. It was worse than she imagined. The story not only detailed the financial discrepancies but also implicated her directly, suggesting that she had been complicit in Marcelo's actions. Anonymous sources claimed that Lays had turned a blind eye to the irregularities in exchange for maintaining the company's rapid growth. Her hands trembled as she set the phone down. The betrayal she had been trying to contain was now a public spectacle, and she was being painted as the villain. The office buzzed with whispers as the news spread among employees. Lays could feel their eyes on her as she walked through the halls. The same people who had admired her, who had looked up to her as a visionary leader, now regarded her with suspicion. By mid-morning, the story had gone viral. Social media was flooded with posts condemning her, calling for her resignation, and questioning her ethics. Even prominent figures in the tech world, people she had once considered allies, were weighing in with thinly veiled critiques. The humiliation was unbearable. Lays had worked tirelessly to build her reputation as a leader of integrity, someone who valued transparency and accountability above all else. Now, in the span of a few hours, that reputation was in ruins. Her assistant knocked softly on the door and stepped into her office, looking nervous. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting," she said, her voice hesitant. Lays nodded, her throat tight. "Set it up." The meeting took place in a virtual conference room, with board members joining from various locations around the globe. Their faces appeared in neat squares on her screen, each one a mixture of concern and tension. "We've all seen the news," one of the directors began, his tone carefully measured. "Lays, we need to hear your side of the story." Lays took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. "The allegations are false," she said firmly. "I initiated an internal investigation as soon as I noticed irregularities in our finances. The evidence points to Marcelo acting alone. I had no knowledge of his actions, and I've taken steps to ensure the company's assets are secure." Another director frowned. "The media is painting a very different picture. Do you have proof to support your claims?" "I do," Lays replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I'll share all the evidence we've gathered, including the results of the forensic audit. I'm fully committed to transparency and accountability." The conversation continued, with the board members questioning her about every detail of the situation. While most of them seemed willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, a few were clearly skeptical. "We need to manage the optics carefully," said one of the directors. "Right now, the public perception is that the company's leadership is compromised. That could scare off investors and partners." Lays nodded. "I understand. I'm prepared to face the media and clear my name. But I need your trust and support to navigate this crisis." After an hour of intense discussion, the board agreed to give her a chance to present her side of the story. But their parting words were clear: the company's survival depended on how she handled the fallout. As the meeting ended, Lays leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. She had won a small victory, but the battle was far from over. Her PR advisor, Camille, called shortly after the meeting. "We need to craft a statement immediately," she said. "We can't let the media control the narrative." "I'll handle it," Lays replied, her voice firmer than she felt. "But first, I need to talk to the team." Gathering the employees in the main conference room, Lays stood before them, her heart pounding. She could see the worry and uncertainty in their faces. These were people who had poured their hearts into the company, who had trusted her to lead them. "I know many of you have seen the news," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "And I know you have questions. Let me be clear, I had no knowledge of Marcelo's actions. The evidence we've gathered proves that he acted alone, and we're taking steps to ensure this never happens again." There was a murmur among the employees, but no one interrupted. "I've always believed that transparency is the foundation of trust," Lays continued. "That's why I've decided to make the results of our internal investigation available to the entire team. You deserve to know the truth, and I want you to hold me accountable as your leader." The room fell silent as her words sank in. Lays could see a glimmer of hope in their expressions, a sign that her honesty had resonated. After the meeting, Lays returned to her office to finalize the public statement with Camille. The wording was precise, carefully crafted to emphasize her commitment to integrity while addressing the allegations head-on. The statement was released that evening, and while the initial response was mixed, some voices in the industry began to rally behind her. A few prominent figures publicly defended her, citing her track record of ethical leadership, but the storm was far from over. The next day, Lays woke to find her inbox flooded with emails from journalists, investors, and even former colleagues. Some offered support, while others demanded explanations. As she sat at her desk, staring at the mountain of emails, Lays felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. She had built her dream from nothing, and now it was on the verge of collapse. But even in the darkest moments, she refused to give up. Lays took a deep breath and opened her laptop. The path forward was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she would fight to protect the company, her reputation, and the people who had placed their trust in her. She owed them that much. Outside, the first flakes of snow began to fall, dusting the streets of Silicon Valley with a rare touch of winter. It was a small reminder that even in the chaos, there was still beauty to be found. The chill of the December evening was sharp as Lays stepped out of her office building. The last few days had been a whirlwind of chaos, betrayal, and relentless damage control. Her public statement had bought her some time, but the media's scrutiny hadn't waned. Every move she made felt like it was being dissected under a microscope. Yet, amidst the turmoil, one voice lingered in her mind, the calm, guiding words of her mentor, Mr. Oswald. She climbed into her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. It had been weeks since she'd last spoken to him, and she realized how much she missed his steady presence. He had always been her sounding board, the person she turned to when the complexities of Silicon Valley threatened to overwhelm her. Now, more than ever, she needed his counsel. The drive to his home was quiet, the streets adorned with twinkling holiday lights. Families bustled in and out of stores, carrying bags filled with gifts, their laughter piercing through the cold air. Lays couldn't help but feel like an outsider, her world so far removed from the simple joys of the season d'Amar. Oswald's house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, its modest charm a stark contrast to the opulence of the tech world. He had retired years ago, stepping away from the constant grind to focus on a life of simplicity and reflection. Lays parked in the driveway and took a moment to collect herself. The weight of her emotions threatened to spill over, but she forced herself to remain composed. When she rang the doorbell, it was Mr. Oswald himself who answered. His kind eyes softened as he saw her, and he stepped aside to let her in without a word. The familiar warmth of his home enveloped her, the scent of freshly brewed tea, the soft hum of jazz playing in the background, and the faint crackle of a fire in the hearth. "You look like you've been through hell," he said gently, leading her to the living room. "Sit. I'll get us some tea." Lays sank into the plush armchair by the fire, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. She stared at the flames, the flickering light casting shadows across the room. When Mr. Oswald returned with 2 steaming mugs, she took hers gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warmth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Lays struggled to find the words to describe the storm she was caught in, but Mr. Oswald's calm presence had a way of drawing out the truth. "It's Marcelo," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "He betrayed me, Oswald. He betrayed all of us." Mr. Oswald nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Tell me everything." The words came tumbling out in a rush. Lays described the financial discrepancies, the mounting evidence against Marcelo, and the media firestorm that had painted her as a co-conspirator. She spoke of the humiliation, the doubt, and the crushing weight of responsibility she felt for her employees, her investors, and her own shattered reputation. When she finished, her hands were trembling. She stared down at her tea, unable to meet his eyes. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "I've worked so hard to build this company, to build myself. And now it's all falling apart." Mr. Oswald leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he considered her words. "Lays," he said finally, his tone gentle but firm. "You're standing at a crossroads. What you do next will define not just your company, but who you are as a leader." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But how do I fix this? How do I move forward when it feels like the entire world is against me?" Mr. Oswald's gaze was steady. "You start by remembering why you started this journey in the first place. Why did you create this company? What values did you build it on? Lay's thought back to the early days, when Lay's Technologies was just an idea scribbled on a napkin. She remembered the passion, the belief that technology could make people's lives better, and the commitment to doing things the right way, even when it was hard. I built it on integrity, she said softly. On the belief that we could create something meaningful without sacrificing our principles. Exactly, Mr. Oswald said. And that's what will guide you through this. Integrity doesn't mean you won't face challenges or make mistakes. It means you take responsibility, even when it's painful. It means you don't let fear dictate your actions. Lays nodded, his words resonating deeply. But Marcelo. I trusted him, Oswald. He was like family. How do I move past that? Mr. Oswald sighed, his expression tinged with sadness. Betrayal cuts deep, especially when it comes from someone you care about. It's natural to feel anger, even grief. But you can't let it consume you. You have to confront him, hold him accountable, and then let it go. Holding on to bitterness will only weigh you down. Lay stared into the fire, her mind racing. Confronting Marcelo felt like an insurmountable task. She wasn't sure if she could face him without breaking down, but she knew Mr. Oswald was right. Avoiding the issue would only prolong the pain. And what about the media? She asked. They've already decided I'm guilty. How do I change their perception? By showing them the truth, Mr. Oswald said simply. Be transparent, Lays. Share the evidence, cooperate with the investigation, and let your actions speak louder than their accusations. People will see your character through the way you handle this crisis. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence as Lays absorbed his words. She felt a flicker of hope, a small but steady light piercing through the darkness. Mr. Oswald's faith in her gave her strength, reminding her of the resilience she had cultivated over the years. As the evening wore on, their conversation shifted to lighter topics, memories of her early days in Silicon Valley, the mentors who had shaped her, and the lessons she had learned along the way. By the time she left, the weight on her shoulders felt just a little lighter. Driving back through the quiet streets, Lays replayed Mr. Oswald's words in her mind. Confront Marcelo. Be transparent. Stay true to your values. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a path forward. And for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of confidence. When she arrived home, she sat down at her desk and began drafting a plan. The confrontation with Marcelo would have to be precise, leaving no room for denial or deflection. The media narrative would need to be reshaped with evidence and transparency. And through it all, she would hold on to the integrity that had guided her from the beginning. Outside, the stars shone faintly against the dark winter sky. The world was still chaotic, but Lays felt a quiet determination take root within her. She would face this storm head-on, not just for herself, but for everyone who had believed in her. As she turned off her desk lamp and climbed into bed, she allowed herself a moment of peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she held on to the wisdom of her mentor and the strength of her convictions. The atmosphere in the office was tense, as if everyone could feel the weight of the events unfolding behind closed doors. Lays, however, moved with quiet purpose. After her conversation with Mr. Oswald, she had spent the weekend preparing for the confrontation that was now inevitable. Marcelo, her partner and closest confidant, was about to face the full extent of his betrayal. It wasn't just a matter of addressing his actions, it was about taking control of the narrative, protecting the company, and ensuring the survival of everything she had worked so hard to build. There was no room for hesitation. This was her moment to act decisively. Lays stood in the center of the boardroom, flanked by her legal team and Eleanor, the company's head of finance. Her usually warm expression was steely, her gaze unwavering. On the polished conference table in front of her was a neatly organized stack of evidence, emails, forged invoices, financial reports, and the results of the forensic audit. Marcelo walked in, his usual confidence faltering as he took in the somber faces around the table. He offered a tentative smile, but no one returned it. Lays gestured for him to take a seat at the opposite end of the table. Marcelo, she began, her voice calm but resolute, we need to talk. He sat down slowly, his brow furrowing. What's going on? Lays didn't answer immediately. Instead, she picked up a file from the table and opened it, revealing the first of many incriminating documents. She slid it across to him, her expression unreadable. These are expense reports from the past year, she said. They include multiple payments to vendors that don't exist, invoices that were fabricated, and transactions authorized under your name. Care to explain? Marcelo's face turned pale as he skimmed the document. He looked up, his eyes darting nervously between Lays and the others in the room. I don't understand. This must be a mistake. Lays folded her arms across her chest, her tone sharpening. It's not a mistake. We've conducted a full investigation. The evidence is clear, Marcelo. You've been siphoning funds from the company for over a year. I didn't, Marcelo began, but Lays cut him off. Don't, she said firmly. Don't insult my intelligence by denying it. Your signature is on these documents. Your email approved these transactions. We have everything we need to prove your involvement. Marcelo leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. His demeanor shifted, the mask of innocence replaced with a more calculating expression. All right, he said slowly. Maybe I made some decisions that weren't entirely above board. But I did it for us, Lays. For the company. Lays's eyes narrowed. You stole from the company. How exactly does that help us? I needed the money to secure outside deals, Marcelo said, his tone growing defensive. Do you think investors just hand out capital without assurances? I had to grease some wheels, make things happen behind the scenes. You've always been the visionary, Lays, but I've been the one making sure we have the resources to make those visions a reality. His words were like a slap to the face. Lays felt a surge of anger rise within her, but she forced herself to remain composed. You didn't just cross a line, Marcelo. You obliterated it. This company was built on trust, on integrity. You've not only betrayed me but everyone who works here, everyone who believed in us. Marcelo leaned forward, his voice taking on a desperate edge. Listen to me, Lays. This is salvageable. We can spin this, make it go away. The media doesn't have all the facts. If we stick together, we can weather this storm. Lays shook her head, her resolve unshaken. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about salvaging the company's reputation. It's about doing what's right. And what's right is holding you accountable for what you've done. She turned to Eleanor, who nodded and slid a document across the table. This is a formal notice of your termination, Lays said. Effective immediately, you are no longer employed by Lays Technologies. Additionally, we will be pursuing legal action against you to recover the stolen funds. Marcelo stared at the document, his expression a mix of disbelief and anger. You can't do this, he said, his voice rising. You need me, Lays. You think you can survive this without me? The media will eat you alive. The investors will pull out. You'll lose everything. Lays met his gaze, her voice steady. Maybe I will. But I'd rather lose everything than compromise my principles. This company was built to make a difference, not to play dirty games. I can rebuild, Marcelo. But you? You'll have to live with the consequences of your choices. The silence in the room was deafening. Marcelo stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He looked at Lays one last time, his expression a mixture of bitterness and regret. You'll regret this, he said before storming out of the room. The door slammed shut behind him, and Lays exhaled slowly, the weight of the confrontation finally lifting. Eleanor placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You did the right thing, she said. I know, Lays replied, though her voice was heavy with emotion. But it doesn't make it any easier. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings and damage control. Lays's legal team worked tirelessly to finalize the case against Marcelo, while Camille, her PR advisor, drafted a public statement addressing his termination. By evening, the statement was released, and the media response was swift. Headlines acknowledged her decisive action, with some praising her for taking a stand against corruption within her own company. While skepticism lingered, the tide was beginning to turn in her favor. Lays returned to her office as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She stood by the window, watching as the city lights flickered to life. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. The battle was far from over. The road to restoring the company's reputation would be long and arduous, and the scars of Marcelo's betrayal would take time to heal. But Lays felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced the storm head-on and emerged stronger for it. As she turned off the lights and left the office, the Christmas decorations in the lobby caught her eye. The tree sparkled with tiny white lights, its ornaments glinting softly in the glow. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was hope. Outside, a light snow began to fall, dusting the streets of Silicon Valley with a rare touch of winter. Lays pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and stepped into the cold, her breath forming soft clouds in the air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she walked away with her head held high. The dream she had fought so hard to build wasn't over, it was just beginning a new chapter. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp pavement. The office building stood quiet, bathed in the soft orange hues of dawn. Lays arrived early, as she always did, but today felt different. There was a heaviness she couldn't shake, even though the worst seemed to be behind her. Marcelo was gone, his betrayal exposed, and the initial shockwaves were beginning to subside. Yet, the path forward felt uncertain, fragile, like walking on glass. The office was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the usual hum of activity. Most of the team wouldn't arrive for hours, but Lays cherished these moments of solitude. She needed the time to think, to process, and to prepare for the day ahead. The pile of work waiting on her desk seemed insurmountable: legal documents, press inquiries, investor communications. Each task was a reminder of the damage that had been done and the painstaking effort it would take to rebuild. Lays sank into her chair, opening her laptop and scrolling through the headlines. The media's narrative was shifting, albeit slowly. While some outlets continued to question her leadership, others had begun to highlight her swift and decisive actions in handling the crisis. The termination of Marcelo and the transparency of the internal investigation were being recognized as acts of integrity, though the shadow of doubt still lingered. Her email inbox was a chaotic mix of support and scrutiny. Messages from colleagues, industry leaders, and even strangers poured in, offering words of encouragement or seeking clarification. One email, in particular, caught her eye. It was from an investor who had been with her since the early days of her first startup. "I've always believed in you, Lays," the email read. "This situation doesn't change that. If anything, it reaffirms why I trusted you in the first place. Stay strong. The tech world needs more leaders like you." A small smile tugged at her lips as she read the message. It was a reminder that not everyone had lost faith in her. Despite the storm she was weathering, there were still people who believed in her vision and values. The quiet was broken by the sound of footsteps approaching. Eleanor, the head of finance, appeared in the doorway, holding a binder filled with reports. Her expression was serious but supportive. "We've finalized the financial recovery plan," she said, setting the binder on Lays's desk. "It's going to be a tough few quarters, but we can stabilize if we stay disciplined." Lays nodded, flipping through the pages. The numbers were stark, a sobering reflection of the damage Marcelo had caused. But there was a glimmer of hope. The company wasn't beyond saving, it would just take time, effort, and unwavering commitment. "Thank you, Eleanor," Lays said, closing the binder. "I know this hasn't been easy for anyone, but I appreciate your dedication. The team needs to see that we're still standing, that we're not giving up." Eleanor smiled faintly. "They believe in you, Lays. More than you realize. Today's town hall will be a chance to remind them of why they joined this company in the first place." The town hall. Lays had almost forgotten. It was her first opportunity to address the entire company since Marcello's departure. The thought filled her with a mix of dread and determination. She knew she couldn't shy away from the truth, but she also needed to inspire hope. The hours leading up to the meeting were a blur of preparations. Lays reviewed her talking points, rehearsing them in her mind as she paced her office. By the time the employees gathered in the main conference room, she was as ready as she'd ever be. Standing at the front of the room, Lays surveyed the faces of her team. There were over 100 people in the audience, from engineers to marketers to administrative staff. Some looked tired, others anxious, but most were simply waiting, for answers, for reassurance, for direction. Lays took a deep breath and began. "Thank you all for being here," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "The past few weeks have been some of the most challenging in this company's history. I know many of you have questions, and I want to be as transparent as possible." She paused, letting her words sink in. "What happened with Marcello was a betrayal, not just of me, but of all of you. I trusted him, as I'm sure many of you did, and that trust was broken. But I want you to know that we are taking every step to ensure this never happens again." There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd, a ripple of shared understanding. "I also want to take responsibility," Lays continued. "As the leader of this company, it's my job to protect you, to protect what we've built together. I failed to see the warning signs, and for that, I'm truly sorry. But I promise you this, I will do everything in my power to rebuild the trust that has been shaken." She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of her employees. This company was founded on a belief in innovation, collaboration, and integrity. Those values haven't changed. If anything, they're more important now than ever. We have an incredible product, an incredible team, and an incredible vision. Together, we will move forward. The room was silent for a moment, and then the applause began. It started with a few scattered claps but quickly grew into a standing ovation. Lays felt a surge of emotion, her chest tightening as the weight of their support washed over her. They believed in her, despite everything. They believed. After the meeting, employees approached her individually, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. Some shared their own stories of struggles and setbacks, while others simply thanked her for her honesty. It was a reminder that leadership wasn't about perfection, it was about resilience and authenticity. Later that evening, Lays sat in her office, reflecting on the day. The town hall had been a success, but the road ahead was still long. There were investors to reassure, partnerships to salvage, and a reputation to rebuild. Yet, for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of clarity. She thought of Mr. Oswald's words, "Integrity doesn't mean avoiding mistakes. It means taking responsibility for them and making things right." That was exactly what she intended to do. As the office emptied for the night, Lays took a moment to walk through the space. The Christmas tree in the lobby sparkled with tiny lights, its ornaments reflecting the glow. It was a symbol of hope, of renewal, of the spirit that had carried her this far. Standing before the tree, Lays whispered a silent promise, to herself, to her team, and to everyone who had placed their trust in her. She would rebuild what had been broken, not just for the company but for the people who believed in the dream she had created. Outside, the snow began to fall softly, blanketing the streets of Silicon Valley in a rare touch of winter magic. Lays stepped into the cold, her breath forming clouds in the air. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear, she wasn't done fighting. Not by a long shot. The days following the town hall brought a noticeable shift in the atmosphere at Lays Technologies. Though the scars of betrayal were still fresh, a renewed sense of purpose had begun to take hold among the team. Employees moved through the office with cautious optimism, their focus shifting back to the work they were passionate about. The holiday season provided a comforting backdrop, a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity for renewal. Lays, however, found little time to rest. Her days were consumed by meetings with legal teams, conversations with investors, and press appearances aimed at salvaging the company's reputation. Each interaction was a test of her composure, but she faced them all with the determination of someone who refused to be defined by failure. Despite the progress, the betrayal lingered like a shadow in the corners of her mind. Marcelo's actions had not only damaged the company but also fractured her belief in her own instincts. She replayed their last conversation in her head, his mixture of denial and justification ringing hollow. The person she had once trusted implicitly now felt like a stranger. It was a cold evening when Lays found herself sitting alone in her office, the faint glow of the city lights visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Christmas tree in the corner twinkled softly, its ornaments reflecting the gentle light. She stared at her laptop, the blank document on the screen waiting for her to draft a final statement to the team. Her thoughts drifted to forgiveness, a concept that felt both foreign and necessary. Marcelo's betrayal had left a gaping wound, but carrying the weight of anger and resentment would only deepen it. Mr. Oswald's advice echoed in her mind: confront the truth, hold people accountable, and then let it go. Bitterness is a burden you can't afford to carry. Lays closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. Forgiveness wasn't about absolving Marcelo of his actions. It was about freeing herself from the hold those actions had on her. She didn't have to condone what he had done, but she could choose not to let it define her. The sound of a knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Camille, her PR advisor, entered, holding a folder. Her usual sharp expression softened as she took in Lays's weary posture. I thought you might want to see this, Camille said, placing the folder on the desk. It's a roundup of media coverage from the past week. The tone is shifting in your favor. Lays opened the folder and scanned the articles. Headlines praised her decisive actions, calling her a leader who faced adversity with transparency and integrity. Some pieces highlighted testimonials from employees and investors who vouched for her character. It was a stark contrast to the accusatory coverage of weeks prior. This is good, Lays said, her voice tinged with relief. It's a start. Camille nodded. People are starting to see the real story. But the narrative isn't finished yet. How you move forward will define how the world remembers this chapter. After Camille left, Lays returned to her desk and stared at the folder. The articles were a validation of her efforts, but they didn't erase the pain or the lingering questions. She knew what she needed to do next. The following day, Lays scheduled a meeting with the core leadership team. They gathered in a smaller conference room, the atmosphere tense but hopeful. As they settled into their seats, Lays stood at the head of the table, her expression calm but resolute. First, I want to thank all of you for your dedication during these difficult weeks, she began. Your hard work and commitment have been the backbone of this company, and I'm deeply grateful. She paused, letting her gratitude sink in. But as we move forward, it's important that we acknowledge what's happened and learn from it. This betrayal has shaken us, but it's also shown us the importance of transparency, accountability, and trust. Eleanor nodded, her expression serious. What's the plan, Lays? We're implementing new safeguards, Lays said. Stronger oversight on financial transactions, mandatory audits every quarter, and an ethics committee to ensure our values remain intact. We can't afford to let this happen again. The team exchanged nods of agreement, their confidence in Lays's leadership evident. The conversation shifted to practical matters, rebuilding investor trust, accelerating the product launch, and addressing employee morale. By the end of the meeting, the room was buzzing with ideas and solutions. As the team dispersed, Eleanor stayed behind, her brow furrowed in thought. Lays, she said, her voice hesitant, do you think Marcelo regrets what he did? Lays sighed, the question cutting deeper than she expected. I don't know, she admitted. But that's not for me to decide. My focus has to be on what comes next. That evening, Lays found herself walking through the office, taking in the sights and sounds of her team at work. The energy was different now, still intense, but infused with a sense of hope. Employees laughed and chatted as they decorated their desks with garlands and ornaments, the holiday spirit a welcome reprieve from the chaos of the past weeks. As she passed the break room, she noticed a group gathered around a whiteboard, brainstorming ideas for the company's holiday party. The sight brought a smile to her face, a reminder that even in the darkest times, people found ways to come together. Lays returned to her office and sat by the window, watching as the city lights began to twinkle in the distance. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the struggles, the triumphs, and the lessons learned along the way. Forgiveness wasn't a destination she had fully reached, but she felt herself moving closer. She opened her laptop and began typing. The statement she had been avoiding finally flowed onto the screen, a message to her team that acknowledged the pain of betrayal but emphasized the resilience that would carry them forward. She ended with a promise, to lead with integrity, to learn from mistakes, and to rebuild trust one step at a time. When she finished, she leaned back and let out a long breath. The weight she had been carrying felt a little lighter. Forgiveness was a process, and she was taking the first steps. Outside, the first flakes of snow began to fall, blanketing the city in a soft white glow. Lays watched as the snowflakes danced in the wind, their quiet beauty a stark contrast to the storm she had weathered. It was a reminder that even in the harshest winters, there was a promise of renewal. For the first time in weeks, Lays allowed herself to feel a sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but she knew she wasn't walking it alone. She had her team, her values, and her unwavering belief in the dream she had built. And that was enough. The final days of December unfolded quietly, the chaos of the past few weeks giving way to a sense of cautious optimism. The offices of Lays Technologies, adorned with garlands and shimmering lights, exuded a warmth that stood in stark contrast to the challenges that had tested everyone's resolve. The product launch, initially delayed by the crisis, was now back on track, and the company had begun to stabilize. But more than the numbers or deadlines, what stood out most was the change in the people. Lays watched her team from her office window, their laughter and camaraderie filling the air as they prepared for the company's modest New Year's Eve celebration. It wasn't the grand event they had originally planned, with luxury venues and high-profile guests. Instead, Lays had insisted on something simple, an intimate gathering in the office to honor the resilience and spirit of the team that had weathered the storm with her. As the clock edged closer to the evening, Lays stepped into the main workspace, her presence greeted with warm smiles and light applause. The sight of her team, people who had stood by her, who had worked tirelessly despite the turmoil, filled her with gratitude. She took a moment to absorb it all, the weight of recent weeks lifting ever so slightly. The room was alive with soft music, the scent of catered food, and the sparkle of fairy lights that hung across the walls. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, its ornaments reflecting the golden glow of the string lights. The atmosphere was far from extravagant, but it was heartfelt, a celebration of endurance and togetherness. Lays moved through the room, stopping to chat with small groups of employees. She asked about their families, their holiday plans, and their hopes for the new year. She made a point to thank each person individually, her words genuine and filled with admiration. As the evening progressed, Eleanor approached her with a glass of champagne. "You've done well, Lays," she said, her voice steady with admiration. "The team needed this. We all did." Lays smiled, taking the glass. "It's not just me, Eleanor. It's all of us. I couldn't have done this alone." Eleanor nodded, her expression softening. "Still, you gave us something to believe in again. That matters." The room quieted as Lays stepped to the front, raising her glass to signal a toast. The team gathered around her, their faces filled with anticipation and respect. "I want to thank each and every one of you," she began, her voice carrying a mix of emotion and resolve. "These past weeks have been some of the hardest we've ever faced, but you've shown me what true resilience looks like. You've stood by this company, by each other, and by me. For that, I will always be grateful." She paused, glancing around the room. "We've learned a lot through this experience. We've seen how fragile trust can be, and how important it is to protect it. But we've also learned that even in the face of betrayal, we can rise stronger. That's exactly what we're going to do in the new year." The team erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the space. Lays raised her glass again. "Here's to us, to our integrity, our innovation, and our commitment to building something meaningful." 2024 is the year we rebuild, not just our company, but the trust and dreams we've always stood for. As the team clinked glasses and exchanged smiles, Lays felt a surge of hope. The fractures caused by Marcelo's actions hadn't disappeared, but the cracks were beginning to mend. The company's foundation, built on integrity and collaboration, had weathered the storm. Later, as the clock ticked closer to midnight, Lays found herself standing near the Christmas tree, watching the team laugh and dance. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, the triumphs and struggles, the betrayals and redemptions. It had tested her in ways she hadn't thought possible, but it had also reminded her of the strength that came from staying true to her values. Her thoughts were interrupted by Camille, who handed her a small envelope. "This came for you earlier," Camille said with a knowing smile. "Thought you might want to read it before the year ends." Lays opened the envelope, pulling out a handwritten note. It was from Mr. Oswald. The familiar slant of his handwriting brought a smile to her face as she read. "Lays, the true measure of a leader isn't how they handle success, but how they navigate adversity. You've shown the world what it means to lead with integrity and courage. I couldn't be prouder of you. Remember, the road ahead is long, but you've already proven you can handle it. Here's to a new year filled with hope and purpose." Oswald. Lays folded the note carefully, slipping it into her pocket. It was a simple gesture, but it felt profound, a validation of everything she had worked for and everything she had endured. The countdown began, the team's voices filling the room as they shouted the numbers together. 10, 9, 8, Lays joined in, her voice strong, her heart light. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. The room erupted in cheers, confetti raining down as champagne glasses clinked and people hugged each other with unrestrained joy. Lays stood in the middle of it all, watching as the team celebrated not just the start of a new year, but the beginning of a new chapter. As the celebrations continued, Lays stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The night sky was clear, the stars shining brightly above the city that had become her home. The challenges of the past year were behind her, and the possibilities of the future stretched out before her like an open road. She took a deep breath, the cold air invigorating her. This wasn't just the end of a difficult chapter, it was the start of something new. She had faced betrayal and heartbreak, but she had also found strength, resilience, and an unshakable belief in herself and her team. Turning back toward the building, Lays smiled. She was ready to rebuild, to inspire, and to lead. The dream she had built wasn't broken. It had simply evolved, becoming something stronger, something greater, and as the laughter and joy from the office spilled out into the night, Lays knew one thing for certain: the best was yet to come. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your favorite part in the comments below. Your support means so much to us. See you in the next video.